none of this is all that new in some ways. If you go back to John Gottman's 1961 book, which is that thick, 800 pages, and he says on page 9, it may seem bulky to the reader, but the author feels it provides just a brief summary, indicating perhaps some kind of arguments with editors. So, bearing that in mind, I'll keep this short. But it's interesting, you know, when you go back and read these things, like 600 pages into that book, there's a section on transportation in chapter 12, and much of it reads like it was written today, congestion and so on, how difficult it is to get to work. So what you're looking at here is the United States, I shouldn't say that, the lower 48. But what you're actually looking at is 250 metre squares within which people live. Everywhere else is white, and that's obviously just a settlement pattern map. And that shows us where people live, which is quite interesting, but doesn't really say much about how those places are connected, and the connectivity is obviously a big part of what we're discussing when we think about megaregions. So this is a map that I did of commuting in the United States, lower 48, and this just shows point-to-point commuting connections of 100 miles or less, which covers like 95% plus of all commutes. And some people would see that kind of thing and go, yeah, it just shows you where people live. And it does that, but it also shows you the directions and the connections that wouldn't otherwise be visible. So you can start to see, say, for example, you know, is Nashville and Knoxville more or less connected than they might be based on their distance apart? You can start to understand how the constellation of cities, and it's this kind of constellation thing where we try to understand how they connect together. And that's quite an interesting one, just because of the spatial patterns of development in the United States. I did some work about maybe 15 years ago on this kind of stuff in England, looking at the Royal Town Planning. It was for the Royal Town Planning Institute, and we talked about constellations, and we used a kind of interstellar metaphors and supernovas and all that. But it does look a little bit like constellations. If you make it move, those are dots, and those are people going on the left-hand side. They're going to Sacramento, and then they're going home in the evening. And the commute's not really that easy, of course. And this is DC area. The dots represent the counties people come from. Now this was the data I prepared and put together, and then again I shared it online, and somebody called Mark Evans, programmer based in Ann Arbor, who had some spare time, and did this. And the great thing about this is that he did these visualizations, but if you go into his web page, you also get the data in tabular format below these to tell you how many people that are moving. And by the way, these slides are, I've shared them online, bit.ly/what are megaregions good for, so you can get that at the end. So that's just a kind of a visual representation. Now if we take it back, the European perspective, I know Armando mentioned this. This is a concept, an idea used in different language in different places. This is the original piece in a French magazine called Le Nouvel Obs from 1989, which took me a while to hunt down, where the concept of the so-called blue banana, the European, the kind of area here, that may be highly tenuous, but it's a concept that has enduring power, and it has some uses. So that's also important today, I suppose, in Steffi Durer's book about the visual language of spatial planning, how these spatial metaphors are important. So that's kind of framing of it. I put this in because some of you may have seen this work by Paracana called Connectography, which got an absolutely savage review by Evgeny Morozov. A thin and interesting essay nestled inside the enormous pile of fluff. So I was sort of troubled by some of the work that had been done in connectography and how important connectivity was, but there was no real empirical analysis, which is partly what motivated me to think about that and work with Garrett. How connected are things, or how disconnected are things in reality? And if we know things are very disconnected, that are close together, then that might spur us to do something about it. And of course, if we look globally, take the same kind of data globally, you can see this is population. I split the world up into 1 degree cells of latitude and longitude. That's a global population data set. And you can obviously see your megalopolis here. But then you start to look at East Asia. I've shaded it so it's the whole of India's glowing, a good chunk of China, a place like Jakarta. If you look at data on Jakarta, Jakarta's added 10 million people, or the metro area of Jakarta's added 10 million people in about 15 years. So when, we think about growth problems here, and if you look at Jakarta's transportation options, pretty limited, same in Manila and so on. So these are kind of global issues, but the problems are different at different places. So this is the last thing before we talk. I think the number of things that megaregions are good for, but I think helping us think beyond invisible boundaries is good. And there's a functional element to this as well. There are many ways to think functionally. We've looked at it from a transportation point of view, but of course there are many different human activities which we can think about. And even if we do look at things like transportation and travel to work, that is very variable. High value jobs, people are going to commute 100 kilometres, but if you're working in a low wage job, that doesn't really make sense. So there's multiple overlapping geographies. And then thinking about number 3, helping us understand how the economy and society works from a spatial perspective is important. Globally, we can maybe make more sense of global urban development, and as we were talking about last night, and Enrique was talking about, I think is an important point, that we have a concept that makes sense in one place. It's important to think about whether that has any relevance in another place, another part of the world, and sometimes the answer is probably not. And planning is obviously important, so this can, I think, help us make plans at the right level. If we look at the UK and the example of London, London's a city of about 8.8 million in Greater London, but really it's a functional urban area of 10, 12, 15 million, depends how far you're willing to travel. And these mismatches obviously cause problems. So these are some of the things. I probably just prompted an initial 5 there, but there's many more. So that's my take on it.